Good morning. We are so excited to welcome you to our session today, discussing how a nationally recognized management consulting firm, Summit Leadership Partners, is harnessing their data to drive competitive advantage. My name is Kelly Negron. I'm a marketing manager here at MicroStrategies and your host for today's session. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This event is being recorded. Please post any questions you may have in the Q&A section. We're going to do our best to address those at the end of the conversation. If for some reason we're not able to answer your question, we will have someone reach out to you after the event. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Kevin Impelman and Juan Nunez. Kevin is the Director of Consulting Products, Services, and Analytics, Summit Leadership Partners. He has extensive experience serving as a trusted advisor and expert across different industries in the areas of product development, leadership, strategy, and organization improvement. Kevin partners with clients to provide proven solutions while providing thought leadership and developing innovative services and products. Juan is the data and analytics practice leader here at MicroStrategies. He and his team engage with business leaders to help them realize the role their data can play within their environment. They implement business and technical solutions where advanced analytics plays a key role in supporting emerging business models and optimizing operations. It is now my pleasure to turn this over to Juan to kick off today's conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, Kevin. It's a really good time to get an opportunity to chat with you about the great work that you folks are doing at Summit Leadership Partners. So to get into it, can you tell us a little bit about Summit Leadership Partners and your company and what you folks do?
Sure, definitely. So thanks for having me. We're a leadership advisory firm, and we work with companies and leaders to essentially unlock their potential performance, their peak performance. And we work with mostly mid-market companies. We in the industry, specifically within private equity, and work with private equity clients and their portfolio companies. And we work with our clients at three levels. So one is working with individual leaders, providing assessments, development, coaching, really making the most of what individual leaders can do. The other area where we work in is with management teams. And so specifically within private equity, one of the key drivers of value creation is how well their management team works together and aligns and positions the company forward. And so we work with teams to go through the dynamics to figure out how they can operate best, both from a dynamic standpoint, how they communicate, how they get along, but also how they operate and make decisions. And then finally, we work at the broadest level, at the organization level. And so we provide insight on organizational design, structure, operating model. We conduct in-depth organizational surveys to understand the employee experience. And so we operate at those three different levels, again, to try to figure out how we can help accelerate performance and drive value creation plans through the talent within the organization. And so we've been doing it for several years, have a great group of consultants, but excited to talk about some of the data initiatives we've done to help augment that.
Yeah, so thanks, Kevin. As you were talking about the different levels in which you work in an organization, I couldn't help but to think that the data that you're dealing with, that there's very specific things about an organizational performance, but there are other sort of softer type topics. You were talking about teams and how they get along. And I'm curious, does that present a challenge in the way that you think about data or how you've been thinking about data historically?
Yeah, definitely. And working in this space for a long time in people analytics, HR data, people analytics data is always messier. It's not as cleaner. Ultimately, we're trying to capture a lot of times what's in people's heads. So for my background, I'm a psychologist, and we have a lot of psychologists within our firm. And so, we're trying to understand how people approach work, their leadership style, And to your point, it does present a challenge because the dynamics of how a management team gets along is tougher to capture in a quantitative sense than operational data, financial data that's just constantly marketing data that's tracking different things. And so it definitely does present a challenge in trying to understand, the right level of unit of analysis that we're getting at, and having good data to look at, good quality data to look at, and not just gathering data for data's sake where it's not really meaningful or impactful.
Yeah. It makes me actually think about things like, if you think broadly about industries and what they run into, some things are financial, very specific and quantitative, as you said, but some things are about the creative that we put out there for marketing messages and whether it's effective or not. And the words that we use when we communicate about our brand. And so there's some parallels, interesting parallels there between softer and not so quantifiable things. So we met, I think it's a little bit close to a year and a half ago, and you were going through a different process at the time. Would you take us back a little bit, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Sort of the thought process you were going through as you were trying to bring your data together. If I remember correctly, you didn't really have a way to analyze all of this data that you folks generate in a place. Can you take us back a little bit, please?
Yeah, definitely. So, certainly the getting our data together was an initiative that was top of mind for us as a firm, and it was something that we would push along the way, but really couldn't wrap our hands around it to make sure it was something that was something we could use ongoing. And with the nature of the work we do, we're a service, we're an advisory firm, and we're delivering whether it's a report in Word or in a PDF file or a PowerPoint presentation, and all these files and deliverables are sort of scattered across our shared drive and things like that. And then we use online platforms to assess people, and assess individual leaders, assess organizations. Those data were in different platforms we'd have to access. And so we had the scattered data, and then every once in a while we'd have these Herculean efforts where in the blood, sweat, and tears of graduate interns, we would pull it all together and have it in a spreadsheet. But then that would be a point in time. And then we'd move on, several months later, and it's like, hey, let's look at some data for some thought leadership or to provide some trends for clients. And then again, it's like, okay, now we got to go back to the drawing board. So we needed something more sustainable where we could gather all the historic data we've done, but also have something that would house our data going forward. So it wasn't going to be so much of a chore to match everything and pull it together. And so yeah, to your point, that's where we approached MSI. Sorry, that's my other coworker, about how can we do this and get something more sustainable. So yeah.
All right. So the interesting bit there, well, all of it's very interesting, but one thing that catches my attention is how you had like really valuable data in this many places, and your objective was, how do I bring it together without having to spend interns' tears, as you said, to get that done. And I think a lot of folks run into that. Now, because it took so much effort to bring it together, to analyze it, or because you didn't have that process, what couldn't you do as an organization? What was it preventing you folks from achieving?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and there's a reason. There's a lot of boutique leadership advisory firms out there that don't have the data. They're able to. They don't have the data together, at least, and they're able to deliver good quality work and provide good assessments of individuals and organizations and teams. And that's kind of what we had been doing. But where we ran into issues or gaps that this filled was as we're doing more repeat business with clients, they wanted to understand trends, right? As we worked with private equity clients across their portfolio, they wanted to know, hey, how does this particular company compare with this other company? It also, the other piece that comes up a lot is benchmarking, right? So, okay, hey, that was, let me know your take on this particular executive, see if they're going to be a good fit. Well, how do they compare to everyone else that you've assessed in your history at Summit, right? And then the other piece was around, thought leadership. So we couldn't do, we have a lot of creative folks, a lot of folks in the organization have great ideas. It's like, hey, I'd love to know what's the difference between founder CEOs and non-founder CEOs. We had the data, but it'd be like, okay, let me get back to you in a couple of weeks and go in to do that. Like we wanted to know that more rapidly, real time. And then finally, the other piece is building an infrastructure where we can show the value of our work, right? Again, going back to that people analytics, human capital data is a little bit messier and tough. One of the other areas within human capital work is because there's not necessarily a lot of data out there, there's not as much opportunity to show ROI, the impact, the value of selecting the right person, having the right team together. And so that allowed us to then have our data that we've done with our clients and then marry that with some of their performance data to show the impact and efficacy of our work. So those were definitely some gaps that this addressed.
So as you collected and cleansed the data and you're able to analyze it, now it becomes a part of the services you provide, and perhaps like enhancing them and creating new ones for you. Tell me if we can go just one step back and tell me a little bit about the process you went through to get to that solution, to select what you were going to do, what ideas did you have, how did you go about figuring out what the steps were to start making this progress towards having better data or unified data?
Yeah. So, I essentially wanted to start off with, I'll start first a little bit talking about the goals of getting the data together, and then I'll talk a little bit about having a provider that would help us reach those goals. So from a goals perspective, thinking about what's the criteria, design criteria essentially for what this will look like. We wanted to make sure that we captured both all the quantitative data that we're collecting, whether that's personality assessment data that's in percentile forms, ratings that we're providing the companies on their proficiency in different areas. But we also wanted to capture qualitative data. So having both structured and unstructured data was important to me, and wanting to make sure we grab that text because leveraging a lot of the advances that we've seen obviously more recently in natural language processing and things like that. And so we wanted to capture that. The other piece is we wanted to make sure that we captured individual data and sort of unique information so we could tie it together. So if I assessed Juan Nunez in 2018 and assessed another Juan Nunez in 2021, do I know if that's the same person? Or if I'm assessing Juan Nunez for a CFO position and then you complete one of our management team diagnostics, do I know that's the same person? So having those identifiers was really important for us to make sure we could tie the data together. And then the next step of that was going back to earlier, how we operate. We have data on individuals at that level, at the team level, and at the organization level. So we wanted to make sure that we could tie those together as well. So that was a key feature for us. And then, we wanted to make sure that it was in a place that we could access it, we could create some visualizations with it, we could tie in, going back to that text data, we could tie in some AI and NLP capabilities. Just knowing that field was emerging, the processing and the analytical techniques were just going to continue to improve. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a data warehouse and a way to access that for being able to do that. And so to get there, I wanted to make sure I had a provider, someone that I could work with that understood our data a little bit better. And it wasn't someone that I kind of had to explain. They didn't have to be an expert in human capital data, right? But they had to understand where we're coming from and really work with us and customize that. And so I felt like that's where MSI helped a lot because, I looked at some other broader analytical shops or, platform providers that would kind of pass you off on some folks, and I'm not sure they quite understood what our goals were and what we're trying to do. So that was really important in choosing who to work with us.
I remember the early days of our conversation, and I think one of the things that resonated with me quite a bit at the time, and with the team that was engaging with you folks, was that some of the challenges you were sharing with us and some of the objectives that you wanted to meet, they connected well with things that are being done in other industries, and there was benefit from having a broader perspective combined with your very, very deep knowledge in your industry. And for example, as you were talking about identification of the individuals, we actually took some things from retail and how we do that in the retail sectors, in the consumer sector, and we brought those approaches to how you're identifying individuals, which was very interesting in itself. And at its most basic level, data sometimes is data, and
Right.
We can actually take advantage of things that we learn across several industries. So you mentioned a little earlier that AI is developing and continue to develop, and it will continue to develop and be integrated. Before we get to the AI piece, and more like today, how has life changed, if you will, in your assessment from the time that you were thinking about making this changes or putting these processes into place? How has life changed in this time period?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really been exciting to see what we're able to do, and ultimately it comes down to speed to insights. And so as far as going back to my example about, hey, I have an idea, can we look at I bring up the founder CEO or something like that. Okay, well, that's going to be a couple weeks with me again working with the grad interns or something like that, going back and forth, assembling that. Let me get back to you. Whereas now, we can either from internal stakeholders, consultants that are working with their clients, or from the clients themselves, be able to get answers right away. So, for instance, I mean, something came through today where it's like, hey, what's sort of our recommendation rate for when we're doing CEO assessments? And through our data, we could provide that right away in an email within 5 minutes, right? So, and also with clients, they're able to, they want to understand, hey, how does this person stack up compared to other people you've assessed? Well, since we've built out that database, we can quickly say, hey, listen, they're probably closer more to the top quartile versus the bottom quartile, and really being able to house some of that. And so it's just I would say how it's changed is just the speed to insights, our ability to be agile, to look at research. We have a couple different thought leadership streams we're looking into. Right now, looking at scalability of leaders and organizations, and just being able to grab that right away is fantastic. And so, for me, it feel more empowered to ultimately help our consultants that are then doing the work directly with their clients to say, hey, can you give me some recommendations for a similar organization so I can better help this client? So we're like, yep, let me pull that. We'll go into our data, be able to do that right away. And so that definitely is moving along. And I think the next iteration, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, is how can we provide this data directly to our clients to even speed up their decision making ability as they go through our data and understand what we've done to date.
So I have to ask you, because what you describe sounds a little bit dreamy, right? So you're going from a lot of effort to you can answer some really important questions in much shorter time because of having these assets together. The process to get it there must have been quite challenging. What do you think it was sort of critical in being able to break some of those barriers in the way of getting to this this state that you're talking about today?
Yeah, well, I think so. A couple key things. I think first and foremost, Eli Jones, our senior data scientist slash rock star, like totally got us there. So that's definitely a key success factor in that process. Obviously working with MSI and the group. I think the thing, if I back up, conceptually, the thing that helped us get from point A to point B was really mapping out what that looks like, understanding the general infrastructure of how we can pull both the structured and unstructured data into the same type of warehouse. Also being able to understand how we can use identifiers to make sure that we know who all the companies, teams, individuals are. So when we're doing analysis, we can leverage that. So conceptually seeing how that was mapped out, seeing sort of the end goal was really helpful to get us there. But then ultimately it was, working with the MSI team, working with Bill, and working with, the rest of the group to then, pull it together. It definitely was a big effort for us to really pull all the historical data together, especially pulling all the data we scraped off of the reporting data, which there wasn't a easy way to do that, but through just some sheer will, we're able to do some of that. But ultimately, then with Eli working with the group and really becoming proficient in Splunk, which is the data environment we use. That was a new environment, new language, but Eli was able to come up to speed super quickly and be able to do that. And then from there, being able to then do a plugin with Tableau Cloud, such that yesterday we're presenting to some clients and we're able to show their portfolio analytics team and data scientists over there, hey, this is how you can access some of these data and look at our dashboards and be able to grab that for your own analytics purposes. And so it was just it was nice seeing the end goal. And there just aren't too many use cases out there for companies our size doing what we do that have been able to pull that together. Certainly there's bigger consulting firms that certainly have these data warehouses and data platforms, but it really was nice to kind of chart out our own path and figure out what we can do. So yeah.
Yeah, and so thank you for sharing that, because I think what you described is so interesting. We're talking about it really becomes about the people and the teams, and yeah, there's a matter, a very specific matter on your expertise, the expertise that your team has on data and process, but also having people with that sort of different type of perspective on how approaches can come together. And at the end of the day, there are a number of obstacles that the experience of going through that many times does help to get through them, because they're going to come up, right? So that partnership that you describe is very critical. I agree. The one thing that you just mentioned around the mid-market and the competition that is given with larger companies, that happens to, I believe that happens to you, and also happens to your clients, right? You mentioned earlier you focus on the mid-market, portfolio, and PE companies. As we think about the future and we think about the advancements, do you see a compression of things that organizations need to be able to do, sort of table stakes, that is going to impact the biggest companies and also the smaller companies? How is the future shaping for the mid-market in your mind?
Yeah, so great question. And the thing that's interesting is working with private equity. Certainly, they're very number oriented, quantitative oriented. And the thing that I see emerging really within the private equity space is as they're investing in these portfolio companies, it's going through a little bit of a migration from, initially some private equity. It's still relatively new industry in the grand scheme of things, but it was all about financial engineering, right? So how can we work with accounting, finance to sort of make the most of our investments and be able to grow that. Then it shifted a little bit more into operational efficiencies. So really getting detailed around, hey, how can we maximize the operational efficiencies of this organization? What are some automation processes we can do? What are some synergies we can do by bolting on different companies? And then that's still in play today. Mm-hmm. The piece that we hear again and time again is when private equity is investing in a portfolio company, they're not necessarily just investing in that product, they're investing in the management team. So being able to have an effective leadership group, management team that can drive a positive culture, that's going to be key, because within the competition space, there's so much out there, right? There's so many different things that people are looking at from a differentiator standpoint. Technology is becoming more accessible to these mid-market firms for automation purposes, things like that. And so a lot of the value creation drivers that we see, some are about how they expand through inorganic growth, or how they position themselves in the market, how they think about adjacent markets. But ultimately, in order for a firm to grow, the employees have to believe and trust in that senior management team. And so the more that we can then quantify what does a good senior management team look like, how is that, how are they improving, how is their dynamic improving, what is their impact to the broader organization, that leveraging that human capital piece is going to be key to drive growth. And obviously, we're a little bit biased because that's the type of work we do, but we do attend other broader private equity market events and things like that, where it's more sort of agnostic, and the human capital piece and leadership piece really comes up time and time again. And so I think that's going to be really interesting. And just in general, I think just with aging of the workforce, generational differences, finding good leaders and having good leadership team is going to be more of a scarce commodity, and ultimately be a key differentiator for organizations that will win and scale.
Mm-hmm. As you have been sharing these different perspectives with us, one thing that jumps at me a little bit is the fact that you're describing data in the more traditional sense. So you still have numbers that indicate results of testing or performance. There's very specific quantitative ideas which could compare in other industries to sales numbers or inventory numbers, like what do I have available, how is it selling. So there are very specific measurable items that you have within your data. But then there's the other component about what maybe a 360 review or a 360 interview reveals about a team or a management team or an individual, what feedback is given about organization. So a lot of written information taken down from those interviews, documents which are basically the results of your consultants doing analysis and expressing their opinions about a situation. And that also becomes part of data that you have accessible. Like in the past, that would have been just a nice document to refer back to. But now you're actually taking that and bringing it and putting it together with the other more measurable data, and it becomes knowledge. Talk a little bit about being able to do that, because that's quite different.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think there's always this this push and pull when it comes to data analysis in this type of realm around what are some unique insights about this organization, this person, where ultimately we can help predict success versus what are some kind of generalities that we know across clients that can help you. And so pulling this data together, like you're saying, really helps us with that latter piece of like, what are trends we can see across our clients that's gonna be helpful. And because to your point, I think what would happen in the past would be, hey, you know, Steve really struggled in his role. Can you go back to his report and see what are some things to look out for? What are some maybe red flags? And so that's a sample size of one, right? And so you may go back for that specific client, for that specific role. Say, hey, listen, like in the CFO role, Steve struggled. He wasn't very strategic, didn't really think things through, and was a lot more reactive. Okay, that's great. But what we can do now with all this data together is saying, hey, across all CFOs, we've assessed across all private equity clients and all of our clients, these are the 4 traits where when we've been able to track their ability to you know, lead to a successful exit or, you know, drive performance and value creation for that particular firm, you know, these are the 4 traits that led to their success. Here are 4 different, you know, behavioral components that are red flags to look out for, derailers. And so it helps us have more confidence and objectivity in what we're providing clients, as opposed to, hey, you know, in Kevin's mind, I've assessed a lot of these people. I can think of a few examples, and that's just, I'm doing the analysis in my head. And that's how a lot of leadership advisory consulting companies, boutique firms do that, right? They have some great consultants, have great experience, but it's all in their head. And ultimately with Summit, you know, we want to build our value as a firm, and to build that value, that wisdom, that collective wisdom is pulling those data together. Because if one person leaves or something happens, right, that person goes out, that wisdom and collective knowledge just walks out the door with it, right? Whereas, you know, building Summit and its value as a firm is pulling on all that together, and then ultimately sharing, you know, that collective wisdom with our clients, and saying, hey, listen, based on our experience, again, going back to the CFO example, here are some things to look out for, but let's also understand what's maybe unique about your particular organization or about these different portfolio companies, and then we can tweak from there too. So
what you're calling out is I can see a parallel with situations and scenarios that many organizations run into. There are particular areas of operations, specifically where it needs a lot of preparation for those people to get to do those jobs, where the knowledge stays with them. And perhaps, you know, if we've been very successful in a particular type of product placement or a particular type of approach to the market, a lot of times that comes from people's intuition, and being able to gather data about that the decisions they have made in the past and make it available to a broader set of people, it should also help with scalability. So, so and needless to mention the risk that you called out, right? These guys may go retire, and what do you do then, right? So, how are you guys thinking about that part? Does it translate into Summit continues to grow and you continue to help additional companies? What does this access to data enable you to do as it relates to PE firms in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, when we think about the space that we are operating in right now, there are some smaller boutique competitors that have some great consultants that have, great experience and insights. And then we also compete with some big like search firms, some big management strategy consulting firms too. And where this provides a differentiator for us is, yes, we have great consultants, but we have representative data that's going to be helpful specifically for our clients. And so for the smaller boutique shops that, don't have necessarily a data put together, they can't really look at those trends and benchmarks and insights from that perspective. And then for the really, really big like search firms, executive search firms, and strategy consulting firms, they have a ton of data, but it's not always like very representative. So our clients, again, going back to the mid-market, are saying, hey, I don't want to compare myself to a Fortune 500 company on this. I want to compare myself to another mid-market company that is PE backed, that has aggressive growth plans. Because you think about that employee experience, right? So if we're measuring organizational health, for instance, as part of we do a lot of organization work. The employee experience with a firm that is growing, 100% year over year is going to be, and it started as a family-owned company. That's a very different employee experience than, I'm over here at Citibank or I'm over here at Walmart, right? Where it's a pretty steady, mature company. And so having that representative data really helps us, as a differentiator. And then ultimately that's going to help Summit scale. We have, just as we advise our clients on growth and scalability, we have strong growth and scalability plans. And we really see that as being a clear differentiator. And so, initially it's helping us, going back to speed to insights, to help our clients. But ultimately, we want to open up our analytics platform and be, a leader in that within the industry. And clients come to us not only just for, our services or offerings, but just insight into data that will help them grow.
And one of the pieces you were talking about, how you find yourself in this place where you are, in a way, competing with smaller firms, but also quite larger. I think that's something that happens to all of the companies in the mid-market, right? That they're finding themselves competing to smaller companies, but also the larger ones. And data does constitute a differentiator and equals the playing field a bit. Do you envision that the being able to embrace data and AI, it's going to enable you to compete with larger companies? How will that happen, you think?
Yeah, no, definitely. Because, to your point, I think the advantage of working with smaller boutique shops is you get that sort of like personal attention, white glove service, like very focused on you as a client, what makes you unique. Whereas companies also, and the thing I found in my consulting career is companies are always in this balance of, we're a unique snowflake. We're different than every other company in our industry. But I really want to know benchmarking stuff compared to all these other people all the time, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so companies may go to a bigger service provider that will have benchmarks, may not have the same level of like touch and service and things like that, but they can at least, you know, feel better about like, okay, that seems, you know, the advice they're giving us, the insights they're giving us are data backed, is based on benchmarks that we trust and things like that. So I think by, you know, how does this position us? You know, leveraging data, being able to get to data, I would say where the AI piece comes in is being able to get to insights quicker and being able to have, you know, more robust prediction models. To your point, levels the playing field from that data piece, right? And have representative benchmarks. But then we can also continue to be fantastic consultants that provide great service and are, you know, that standpoint. So, you know, a bigger firm, they may, you know, may talk to one salesperson, another salesperson talks to you, they give you one consultant, now it's a different consultant, right? So it's, you know, the relationship piece is really important to us, and building strong relationships with our clients and, you know, really fostering those is key. So that's not going to go away. The thing that's going to help is that when they say, hey, listen, I'm taking your insights, I really like it. If I'm going to this group of like quant people at PE that just speak in numbers, and so if we can then bring the numbers with them, you know, just human capital heads and talent leads, then that definitely helps them and have greater confidence in that. And ultimately within private equity, I mean, what they're doing is it's a lot around risk mitigation, right? They're making a gamble, they're making an investment in a firm and hoping it's going to grow. So they're looking out for anything that may get in the way of that, right? And so with numbers, it helps sort of the collective anxiety ease down if you reduce that risk. So
yeah. The one thing I think you mentioned this, I am not entirely sure when, but in one of our previous conversations, you were talking about the importance of the PE companies are making decisions of investment based on the numbers, based on that information that they can gather from an organization. But at the end of the day, they're also investing in the people. And what you're doing through your data is making that more accessible and understandable from a measurable perspective, which is extremely interesting. So that you alluded to a number of advanced analytics approaches. You talked about natural language processing. You talked about perhaps today or in other conversations, you have talked about being able to predict success factors to individuals, groups. As we know, AI continues to advance with generative AI and different approaches that could be layered on top of that. So it's almost as if there's its own life cycle, right? That's developing on the AI side. Where are you today as it relates to advanced analytics and that side of data? Where do you see things going for your industries or companies like yours?
yeah, no, it's a great question. And you know, I feel like just talking about data, you're required to bring up AI and generative AI. I mean, the value for me is, you know, I worked at IBM prior to coming to Summit, and obviously they're one of the leaders in AI, and you know, I worked with different data scientists and tools and that. And the big takeaway for me looking at that early on was the value of AI is entirely dependent on how great your data is. So garbage in, garbage out. The AI models, the you know, advanced machine learning models are there to compute things, to find insights that we wouldn't otherwise find necessarily. But if the data you're feeding it is not clean, reliable. There's also, knowing we're dealing with people and employment, things like that. It needs to be fair and unbiased as well. And unfortunately, a lot of data that's fed into AI is based on biased human data, and so therefore AI becomes biased, right? So so having a solid database is a great foundation. So that's step one completely. Is just feeling good about our data, the quality of it, making sure it's clean and good. I would say, the two parts that where I can see AI really facilitate is, from helping us and identify more nuanced predictions. And so where I've seen machine learning really help is sometimes in, where you don't have a huge sample size or you have a lot of different variables. So being able to help with prediction, looking at a lot of the interactions between variables is going to be key. I think ultimately that's still going to have to combine with human judgment / logic, right? So, our clients want to hire us because we have experience, we've done that. We can see the AI as a complement to where we provide it. But again, it just helps us bring the data. So it's something that's going to help augment and again, going back to it, it's like, we're trying to make them predictions. Hey, is this leader going to be able to scale at this level? Is this organization, are these red flags so strong that we won't reach our value creation plan? That's ultimately what they want to know from us. And so with AI, we'll be able to have more intricate prediction models from that standpoint. The other piece is just leveraging the large language models, GPT-4 and all the advances in natural language processing. Where that's going to help us really, I think, the most is a lot around consultant efficiency. So so much of what we do is, I always joke around as a consultant, you either play with numbers or you play with words, right? So you're putting together insights, you're taking a lot of, we're interviewing people, we're taking that text, we're writing up reports. And so for generative AI to take that and again be a starting point for us, not saying it's going to take over, what we do as consultants, but I think we see that in other fields and marketing and journalism and things like that. Things like ChatGPT are able to provide a really good starting point for things that then, as consultants, we can spend more time in our creative thinking and thinking about our own experiences and leverage our knowledge and how to convey that best. And so definitely, I think the generative AI is going to help us from an efficiency standpoint and delivering our work, from that. So it's definitely exciting. I think it's going to be a great augmentation. I know the nature of our work, it's not going to replace the human element completely, because I think ultimately people are going to want to hear from a human about like, hey, what do you really think of this person? And there's elements that can't be as well quantified, but it'll definitely, I think, again, help us get into more reliable predictions and then also get to information faster.
So wisdom of memes, I saw it somewhere that AI is not necessarily going to take your job. A person using AI will take your job.
Right, exactly.
So,
right.
Again, I qualify it as wisdom of memes, but I thought that there was some truth to that in the fact that now mid-market companies, regardless of what your industry is, mid-market companies are going to be able to compete because of the accessibility to knowledge, the accessibility to information that as organizations we already have. But now with AI, we can actually empower, to your point, your team members to be more effective, and that's just so powerful to think about. So I know we've talked about a broad gamut of topics around going from data to ultimately delivering insights more quickly. One thing that I know you have focused on quite a bit is how do we protect the information? How do we secure it? And how do we get it in the hands of those who need it? So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about the future from a data consumption. You talked about benchmarks, you talked about how you want to bring that to PE firms, but what can PE firms expect as they work with you that that they may not be able to get anywhere else, or that that they'll be able to benefit from all this data work that you've been doing?
Yeah, definitely. So, part of that is, one of the things that we're working with our PE firms more and more on is, we have the data we're collecting that as part of our service offering. But what we're not necessarily getting all the time is information about how their business is doing, other indicators around, business health, more globally. And so, definitely partnering with them more on sharing that data to get into insights. As I mentioned, a lot of times we'll work with their portfolio analytics team. So they're just crunching all these numbers, right? And they're looking into, all these different forecasting models based on finance and operational numbers, but they're still missing that big equation of that. And so I think that's where we can provide the human capital data and use that as essentially another predictor in those equations, and see what they can do with that. So that's definitely a big piece. I think the other piece that we're wanting to capture more are, is an example for management team. For managed teams, we have a team diagnostic that understands that looks at its benchmark to understand how teams are maturing and evolving. One of the biggest issues with management teams we find is how they communicate and deal with conflict, right? There's always those issues of, one of the management team members is checked out. They only focus on their own, hey, I'm over sales, I only care about that, right? There's another management team member that kind of creates unnecessary conflict with everybody. And so there's all those dynamics, and we capture that through a quantifiable diagnostic right now. But as we do more team coaching and things like that, like being able to capture the actual behaviors and the words, communication, things like that that we do. So being able to focus on capturing those data that as far as how people are interacting, and through things like webinars, Zoom, things like that, we're able to capture potentially some of that, which we need to leverage going forward.
Terrific. It sounds like a very interesting journey, and we definitely want to continue learning about it. We'll definitely invite you back if you care to join us to talk more about what you guys are doing and how things are progressing and changing. It's been very, very, very interesting. I see Kelly is back with us, so we're probably running out of time.
Yes, we actually have a few questions. Just a reminder for those of you that may have joined a little late, feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll try and get through them now. If we can't, someone will reach out to you after the event. So one of the questions here is, you have discussed trusting data bias and security in the data, which are areas you have focused to protect the quality of the results as you integrate AI into your business. Do you have any other concerns about integrating AI, and how are you taking them into consideration in your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key piece of this, knowing that we're collecting data from individuals and organizations, is being very clear in the use of it. And so I think that anytime we're incorporating AI, a big consideration is, at least for me, so it's my background, I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and science is not just numbers and fancy math. Science is actually having a hypothesis, having a research base to where you reach those conclusions. And so anytime we're looking at AI models, I want to make sure that that's whatever the prediction equation, however it's being used, is aligned with logic, with a broader research, so that we're not just, you know, what I would call Dust Bowl empiricism, where we're just making predictions. So that's one piece. The other piece is then being very mindful and careful about, you know, data privacy concerns and things like that for individuals. So I don't want to, you know, take a piece of data that was intended for one thing and then move it to the other. And so just being very thoughtful and mindful about the uses of the data. And I think AI is one of those things where it can kind of like, ooh, we could use it for all these different things. But, you know, just building some parameters and data governance around that is really important.
And then what advice would you have for someone looking to start a similar journey?
Well, you can't hire Eli, he's on my team. No, and this is the point where I plug in SI, right? No, I do think that you know, having a solutions provider like MSI definitely helps. Like honestly, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I'll pull together different data warehouses before I can do this, but you really need some one, external accountability to move it through, and also just some insights, like Juan had mentioned, that, you know, there's insights that Juan and team leverage from other industries that were really helpful thinking about how we organize our data. So I would say that but before you sort of engage in someone, is really being clear and talking about, what do you want to ultimately do? What are the questions you want answered? How will this make how will this address the challenges you're facing? Or if you're a you know, B2B type deal, or B2C even, how does this help your client, your customer? So starting with that, addressing some of the questions, and then really just, you know, phasing it out, because it can feel overwhelming to think about what everything needs to go in, but break it up in chunks and phases, and then, you know, celebrate along the way so that you keep that momentum.
Perfect. It looks like we have about 1 minute left. Juan, Kevin, anything else you want to say before we wrap up today?
So for me, it's been a pleasure, Kevin. The journey has been a total pleasure, and I think that as data and analytics folks, we really appreciate what you guys are doing, what you're going through. And as I said earlier, we'd love to have you back to talk more about the advancements that you're making.
Yeah. No, same here. It's been a pleasure, and exciting to see what's in store in the future.
Awesome. Kevin, Juan, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone else, have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Bye.